It's best if I don't sing.
The record.
You and me, Shelley, we can go.
Joyce, the question today is, what are you singing at karaoke? And not singing is not an option. You got to pull something out of that book. I would leave. Yes, I guess I'll say either you're welcome or I'm sorry about the birds. They are quite active today and we have warblers flying through. So it's a little Tweety over here. The Meow Mix song, wow. Brooks and Dunn, a lot of us like country. A lot of us want to sing country. Okay, Time After Time. Jamie, that's a cute song. That would make me cry if I sang that. Only Human. These are great. Gloria. Cool. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us today, welcome to the Friday Animal Welfare Leadership Roundup call. We are, about 18 months into these calls, nearly every Friday since the start of the pandemic. My name is Kristen, and I am one of your hosts for these calls. And we're happy you're here. If you are new to the call and you haven't been with us, or it's been a little while, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're from, and what brought you to the call. And we have an exciting lineup today. We're going to talk about an issue that's really been at the top of everyone's mind, which is the present and future role of the nonprofit animal welfare organization. And so what we promised is that today would give you a lot to think about, agree or disagree. We think it's going to make for a lively discussion. So we hope you're ready to discuss today. Before we get started, though, and do our agenda, I want to turn it over to Mary Smith from Maddie's Fund.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. It's so great to be here. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Bobby. So I have a couple of announcements. Hey, don't forget that the Community Cast podcast is doing its big online fundraising day on Saturday, and there's a diversity day on Sunday. And Stacy has promised it's going to be chock full of amazing, amazing information that can make us live better lives. All right, ASPCA and AWA Research Forum. You really don't want to miss this. It's November 3rd. You should definitely sign up for it. And speaking about signing up, our very own Sheila Sergeson has asked you all to participate in an access to veterinary care survey that the ASPCA is doing. Allison is putting a link in the chat file. It's really an opportunity to improve access to veterinary care for underserved populations across the nation, but there's a lot that needs to be figured out and you can help them do that. So please fill this survey out. And if you do it before November 5th, you're eligible for a raffle. Also, our Candid Conversations are going to be next week with Allison Cardona, LA County Animal Services. She has a life story you don't want to miss. It's next Wednesday, October 20th at 12 noon Pacific time. And for those of you that are living in California, half of you are very happy this morning and half of you are very sad this morning. I am in the group that is very sad this morning. And that's because the Giants were robbed from their win yesterday by a very, very suspect call. But that's just me being a sore loser, which is what I enjoy doing on a regular basis. So for the Southern California folks, grudgingly, congratulations, but it'll take me a couple months to really mean that wholeheartedly. So I hope you guys continue to go out there and do great things, as I know that you're capable of doing. And I just want to remind you that we haven't talked a lot about diversity, equity, or inclusion, but that should continue to be at the forefront of what we are trying to do. most of the things that we encounter are not of the most egregious nature, as I would propose as an example, John Gruden, for example. But there are many of those more subtle microaggressions that we deal with. And what helps is if we are open to acknowledging that sometimes we're going to say and do something that will cause harm to another person. We need to own it. We need to acknowledge it. We need to apologize for it. And then we need to learn from it and move forward. And those are the kinds of things that we can do on a daily basis in our workplace, in our home, as we're going out in public. As somebody said, we should live every day as though no one else is looking, but we're trying to have the best impact that we possibly can. And we're animal people, and we know about those silent ways of communicating love and compassion and trust. And that's what we should practice. So go out and practice being better humans. That's my goal for this weekend. Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Mary. We want to turn it over to any of our national organization partners who are on the call and do want to share any information with us today. And I just want to share one thing. On this coming Thursday, Professor Katja Gunther, who wrote The Lives and Deaths of Shelter Animals and has been on this call, and I will be doing we will be hosting the first Animals in Society animal section colloquium. And so it's not like other things you've attended. And I wanted to share because it's an interesting format. Basically, we talk for a very, very brief amount of time, and then we have a discussion with the group, and it's 90 minutes. And it's really meant to be a place where we think out loud and talk together, not a place where someone talks at you. And it's a format we're exploring more for this call as well. So would love to have you come. It is, there is the link, and it's midday. I should probably know the time by now, but it's midday this coming Thursday, which will be different for all of you. I think it's 1 p.m. my time, which is Central Standard Time, which would mean it was 11. But it should be interesting because I think the discussion will be good. It's about really what a radical future of animal sheltering will look like. So it's things that we don't get to talk about other places, and would love to see you there. So please come if you can. So any other national org updates?
Hi, it's Catherine from Canada. That's different than Kathy from Canada. But I just wanted to remind everyone that the Association of Animal Shelter Administrators of Ontario have our conference coming up on November 2nd, 4th, 9th, and 12th. It's a half-day conference each of those days in the morning. We're also pleased to have Kirsten coming on and doing a session on the future of animal sheltering as one of our awesome speakers. And we'll make sure that we put the link in for the registration. Hope to see some of you there.
I'll jump in. My name is Courtney. I'm with Annenberg Pet Space in Los Angeles, and we have a pretty fun, free online workshop coming up that focuses on caring for small companion animals. So it'll hopefully be good for either some of your staff, volunteers, fosters, or even your adopters. And we'll have an exotic and small mammal veterinarian talking about small mammal husbandry and dietary information. So I'll put a link in the chat, but feel free to share it with your staff and your networks and adopters. We'd love to have anyone and everyone join us.
Hey, Kristen, it's Brent from Best Friends. Just wanted to let everyone know that the Best Friends National Conference in 2022 will be alive and in person in Raleigh, North Carolina, July 7th through 9th. And we have just this week started taking applications for speakers. And so I know there are a lot of folks on this call who are doing some amazing work, a lot of new types of work, a lot of different types of life-saving programs. And so, so please sign up to speak. We have streamlined the speaking proposal process this year. So if you've applied to do it before and we made it really tedious up front, we're going to leave the tedious stuff until after you are selected. So please go sign up. I'll put a link in there. And John Dunn, no, fingers crossed, we are doing it alive and in person. So we'll figure out what requirements have to be in place at that point in time, but we're not going back on it. So again, July 7th through 9th, speaking applications will be due November 19th. So you have just a little over a month to get those in, and I'll post the link in the chat. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Stacy's here with the Community Cats podcast. On the best friends note, I just wanted to let you know that I am moderating a panel that is being facilitated with some of the Best Friends Network regional representatives on Thursday, October 21st at noon Eastern time. And it's going to be a panel of some organizations from the Southeast. And this call is usually oriented to many of the shelters up in the Northeast. So it's sort of a meeting of the various different issues going on sort of north and south. But anyone and everyone is welcome to attend this conversation. It's a very open conversation sort of about the challenges around transport. So that is Thursday, October 21st at noon, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Good morning, everybody. This is Jerica from NACA. Next week is an exciting week for NACA. We've got two things happening. First, on Monday the 18th at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, NACA will be hosting an educational hour with Amanda Arrington and Ashley Anderson-Much from Pets for Life with HSUS. It will not be a presentation. It's actually going to be more of a discussion-based hour. So we're really looking forward to this. We'll be talking about sort of the future of field services, how to move towards resource provisions and away from punishment while building trust, positive relationships within the community. It's going to be a really exciting hour. I will put the link in the chat to register. And the second thing is next Tuesday and Wednesday, NACA is the elections for new board members. The voting is next Tuesday and Wednesday. So make sure to check out the candidates and get your vote in if you are a member of NACA. If you are not, I will post a link to join so you can vote. Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. And so we warned you in the chat, but we wanted to give a few minutes today just to hear from you all if there are any wins or exciting things happening at your organization that you really want to share with us. So we asked you if you have any links or photos that you want to share, get those ready. And we're going to ask you just to jump in and share. We're looking for about 5 people to share. So don't wait. If you have something, a win that's happening, something that you feel like you're successful at, or something exciting happening in your organization, go ahead and tell us now.
Hi, this is Amy from Best Friends. I'll be sharing a link on some new educational materials that we launched this week called Cats, Community, and You, really focused on community cat education. And there's some videos that will be running on social on YouTube in both English and Spanish. So I'll share them and feel free to provide feedback or share them forward. Thanks.
Now, don't be shy. This is for any of you on this call. We know good things are happening. So even if you've never talked or you're not sure what you have to share is appropriate for this call, we want to hear from you. So just jump right in.
Hi, I'm Quenby from QT Kittens in Naples, Florida. And we just started in really March or April. And today at noon, as soon as this is over, we have our first grant follow-up call, which I understand is pretty amazing because for such a new organization, most of the grants want 1 or 2 years of your financials. We're like, well, we just started in February and didn't actually start collecting money till March. So, so anyway, wish us luck.
Thanks for sharing. Good to see you. 3 more. We can do this, everybody. Let's do it.
This is Stacy Daines from Long Beach, California. And exciting for us is we have been going through a time of just a lot of change. We implemented a strategic plan about 6 months ago. We have had the largest turnover in our staff's history. I think I have currently 20 vacancies in my organization, including our entire rehoming team. There's nobody working there. So what has been a real struggle is turning into amazing opportunity to really bring on people that are advocates and who love animals and want to help animals, and to bring those people into a municipal shelter. So we're really scared about what was happening, but that is turning into major excitement when we're realizing that we get to realign our organization literally from the ground up. So we're really excited about that.
This is Chase Patterson with Oregon Humane Society. Something exciting for us is we're in the final stages of bringing on a shelter veterinary social worker, and they're going to support our shelter activities, our community teaching hospital, as well as our humane law enforcement. So we're extraordinarily happy about that, and kind of that intersection with human health and really how to help with that one health care model. So yeah.
Good morning. My name is Jeanette Hanneman. I'm with the Eastern Madera County SPCA here in Oakhurst, California. And I've been brought on board as the new shelter manager, which I'm very excited about. And we are building a new shelter, and I want to share our excitement with just basically getting the parking lot paved. I think it's actually happening today. So that was a big deal for us. And then also our kennels are in production right now. So things are coming together. So hopefully we'll open about the first of the year. And so stay tuned. That's our excitement for right now.
Last call, anybody? Okay, if you weren't here at the beginning of the call, there are 185-ish people on this call, and barely anyone told us what they would sing at karaoke. And I'm really dying to know. So the question of today is, you're at karaoke, you've got to pick a song. What are you singing, or an artist? So please put it in the chat. And while you do that, we're going to move on to our main topic for today. We are here today to talk about the current and future role of the nonprofit organization. And we have the members of the Human Animal Support Services role of the NPO working group here. And so I guess the first thing we want to do is introduce those folks to you, so you know a couple of the people who have been working on this issue. So I will let them jump in. Heather, let's go ahead and start with you, and then we can pass it along to other group members who are here today.
Yeah, hi everyone. Super happy to be here. I'm Heather Owen. This is my dog Trout behind me. That's the big furry lump. I'm the executive director and co-founder of One Tail at a Time in Chicago.
I'm Ellen. I think I've introduced myself enough here, but I'm part of this group as well, and really excited to share with you today.
And I'm Cole Wakefield with Good Shepherd Humane Society, Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and I'm a member of the working group.
We may have a couple of other working group members here, so jump in if you're here. We want to start with just a couple of questions for Cole, Heather, Ellen, and any of the other members who may be here. And the first one is, you all started out sort of with one set of ideas about where you thought the group needed to head and where you needed to put your focus. And you've ended up, which today is going to be a presentation, it's a really different place. Can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the group over the last 16, 18 months?
Sure. Yeah. So we started the role of the nonprofit organization in Haas, really not knowing exactly where to go, because Haas is primarily focused on government funded shelters, really changing animal services to human animal support services. And there are, of course, nonprofit organizations that are contracting out government services, but the vast majority of nonprofits are working in the private space and not necessarily charged with any of the public support that government shelters are. And so we started out with the idea of maybe we need to figure out where the line is between what the government is responsible for and what the private industry, the private sector should be responsible for. And we've also kind of touched on that on the other side of that coin. And it turned out to be really hard because we have so much uncertainty. I guess the right word is market confusion. There's market confusion over who should be doing what and who is doing what. And that's for the community members and also for organizations themselves. And so a lot of times that ends up with duplication of effort and duplication of costs that when we're all fighting for dollars, it's hard to, having more clarity would be incredibly helpful for our industry. So we started there and it proved to be pretty hard without a lot of government input. And then we talked briefly about how, should we be moving, since animal welfare is such a social services type industry or concern, should we be more of an industry that has more nonprofits running government services? And is that something we should start to try to develop out further? And then we landed on, we had multiple topics and we kind of talked about all these things, just like most of the working groups do as you try to puzzle through how do you find your ground as a group. And then we started talking about how there's a real need to clarify, I don't know if clarify is the right word, come up with some guidelines for how to help rescue groups and smaller, like starting nonprofits, help animals, but not get in over their heads and prevent them from getting in situations that turn out really badly for the animals and for them because of public communication or whatever. And so we started working on that and trying to develop what we are calling a risk tolerance guideline, kind of a decision tree for if you want to help with this, you should be looking at X, Y, and Z and try to build up those resources to make sure that you can, in fact, develop the capability to help these animals. And as we were working through that, we really recognized that this is more complicated than it seems. And part of the complication is that that assessment needs to kind of go both ways. And so as we were trying to puzzle through what makes an organization stable enough to be able to help animals, we started to realize there's actually a ton of organizations that are stable enough to help animals, and they do. But when you have a situation of, let's say, a bunch of puppies dying of parvovirus in a government facility, and a tiny rescue group is trying to pull those animals out, but doesn't necessarily have the resources to care for them, they're putting themselves and the animals in a bad situation. And so how do we help the ecosystem of animal welfare come together, and the ones that do have the resources to focus more on those animals so that the little tiny ones aren't necessarily until they build up their resources? So how do we look at this as a whole playing field and try to bring everybody together to try to tackle the problem as a whole? And so I know Heather will do a much better job explaining that than I just did, but we've got, when we think about the whole ecosystem of animals, we know that there may not be enough funding out there, but maybe there is. And maybe we just need to figure out how to divide and conquer a little bit more effectively between all of the people that have their hands in the pot. And so what Heather is going to share briefly is some information about a risk tolerance document that helps guide organizations through thinking about their the reason they exist and the resources they have, and their willingness to take on more risk based on the policies and the freedom they have in programming and the resources they have at hand. And so it turned into a really exciting conversation that definitely deserves more attention. And we're hoping by bringing it to everybody here that we'll be able to have robust discussions about this, and anybody's welcome to join our group as well. But I'll pass it over to Heather.
Yeah, so thank you. And Heather, just before you start, I want to turn to Cole, because Cole, you are part of this group and you sit in a really interesting position and deal with some unique challenges. So can you just talk a little bit about yourself, your organization, and why you felt like this group was an important one to invest your time in?
Yeah, so I'm at Good Shepherd Humane Society in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, and we are a rural animal services provider. And so, you know, that's been one of my passions is how do we develop this sort of thing for rural situations. So what's different with our situation than what a lot of nonprofits face is we're a nonprofit animal shelter, but we don't have a government contract because there's no government contract to be had. Inside of our county, which is the majority of our space here, there's no animal services budget, there's no animal services legislation, there's nothing that requires them in the state of Arkansas to provide any sort of animal services. So we are in a lot of ways acting as a government agency without government funding or governmental authority, which I think that there are a lot of similar situations in rural areas. And so, you know, I decided to join the work group to try to keep that perspective around and make sure that we're addressing that. And that's what we ran into early, is that, you know, we thought, oh, this will be a simple, we can define what this government should do and what they shouldn't do. And it really is sometimes completely different, just depending on whether or not you're crossing a state line or a county line. So that was one of our challenges. And that's been kind of the perspective I've been adding to the conversation.
So Cole, basically, if you weren't doing your work, there just wouldn't be any help for sick, injured animals.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have some small cities inside the county that provide like 1 or 2 part-time animal control officers for the 3 square miles of that city. But yeah, outside of that, there's none. The county has, and part of the reason the county probably hasn't taken on, because they don't have as much pressure to do so, is because we've been here since the 70s. So, you know, it's sort of, that's also the challenge, is how do we push, you know, the government to take responsibility for what they should be doing, without just saying, okay, we're going to shut our doors and make you do it, because that wouldn't be fair either to the people and the animals who need our services. So that's part of our challenges.
Thanks, Cole. It's really interesting to hear about your work, and it's a reminder that all of our communities are so unique. It's hard to imagine for many of us operating in a place where there's no government animal services. So by way of introduction of Heather, all I want to say is that I sort of met Heather through presenting with her for Best Friends. I knew of her work, but I didn't really know her. And by the end of the presentation, all I wanted to do was listen to her talk and not talk at all, because she's such an interesting speaker and her approach to the problems that we face is really unique. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who's going to speak briefly, and then we want to go back to a conversation. So if you have questions, things you really want to come back to as she's talking, put them in the chat and we will do that. So Heather, welcome, and thank you so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And definitely, if anyone wants to jump in and ask a question, please do. We're going to talk about risk tolerance. And so I want to break that down so it's not just like a, you know, pie in the sky concept. I think there's 2 pieces to it. First is your ability to take on, absorb, and mitigate risk. So typically, if you're a larger established organization, you're going to have a better ability to absorb risk than the smaller groups, as Dr. Jefferson mentioned. But then there's the second piece, right? And that is the willingness to take those risks and the willingness to stick your neck out. And I have found that sometimes tends to decrease the larger the organization gets. So there's this interesting dichotomy of the small group sort of sticking their necks out, taking, you know, big dogs, dog aggressive dogs, parvo puppies, ringworm, wild transports full of untested dogs, just lots of things coming out, and probably because that's their passion project. And I've been in both situations. We actually have a poll because I want to know where you all identify. So if we can get that first poll up, pick where you identify. And so we know who we're talking to a little bit. And while we get that going, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my journey and how my concept of risk tolerance has changed through that. So I started as the co-founder of an organization. So we had no money, no facilities, no staff, no nothing. And we were definitely in that group where we were taking on the harder cases just time after time. And it wasn't just my municipal shelter asking me to take them. It was also large established humane societies sending us a list of animals in need of rescue that were like, you know, huge orthopedic cases, ringworm, every big dog in their building because they didn't have a foster program. And it was always like, well, you have a foster program. And I'm like, well, I've seen your 990. I think you can afford one too. So there was always this tension. And I think that that still exists with a lot of the smaller rescue groups where they just feel like their burden is really, really heavy. And I get it. So I've been there before. And then there's the other side, right? And now I've come out and I'm sort of on the other side where I'm paid. I have a healthy staff. I have a healthy budget. We are high volume now. And so I understand wanting to protect your organization. So when it comes to taking on a ton of big dogs, it's like, that's scary. And also you have mouths to feed. You have, you know, all of your animals. You don't want to disrupt your high volume. You also don't want to do anything that could lead you to have to fire someone or close a department or something like that. So I totally understand and empathize with both pieces, but I think there has to be a middle ground. And that middle ground is like this sweet spot where, do I have to launch the polls or do you guys launch the polls? Oh, there it is. Oh, okay. Well, there's this first one. All right. This is a fun one. Do you feel like your group can take more risks to be more effective and life-saving? So hit us up with yes or no. I'm going to choose yes. I know this is anonymous, but that I think that, so this is, now let's take this concept of risk tolerance and like bring it back down to earth. Like, what does that actually mean? And what it means is doing more of what we've all meant to do, which is saving more vulnerable populations. So I'm going to open up this risk tolerance document in a second, but can we get the results of that poll? And then we'll do the second one really quickly as well. Okay, yes, great, wonderful. I'm glad you all agree with that. For you, 23%, I'd actually love to hear from you in the chat, or if you want to chime in and let us know, like, are you already just like taking in a bunch of Panloop kittens or like full of crazy risks in your rescue, or why do you feel like you are already tapped out? But let's go ahead and launch that second one that asks who I'm talking to. Okay, perfect. So if you just, I know this doesn't cover everyone, just pick who you best identify with, and then we'll see who we're talking to, and that will be really helpful. But so, you know, this middle ground here is groups that are growing and use their resources to help the more vulnerable populations as best they can. And that doesn't mean that you overburden anyone. Like, I don't want anyone to think that this presentation or this nudge means I want you to go out and take 27 aggressive dogs tomorrow. Because if I did that, my staff would walk out, right? Like, people would be really bummed. But what it does mean is like, take as many as you can, and then tomorrow create a program or invest in your infrastructure so that you can take more of those animals. And I think, you know, I'm probably going to call on Cole a few times here. Okay. Oh, this is wonderful. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for that. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen because we're gonna launch right into this document that we created, which if someone could actually put the link into the chat so you guys can open it on your computers in case mine is too small. But okay, I don't know that I'm going to be able to share my screen because it's not coming up on here. So I'm going to link it in the chat so you guys all open it and we can follow along together. It goes to the Haas website. Thank you, Allison. Emily, great question. Risk is challenging, and I think it is super subjective because for some people, taking on a Panloop kitten could be really easy. For some, it wouldn't. But let's go into this document because I think that it can be defined pretty easily once we go into it. So if you all open it, we are going to skip the intro because that's sort of what I'm doing throughout. So I want you to go straight to the gap analysis. So this is what we mean by risk. So we identify who in shelters needs support still. So all of these animals are the risk categories. So then the program, we have solutions. And so if you aren't able to do a lot of risky things right now, you can still go in and take as many healthy adoptable animals as possible. But if you're one of those larger established humane societies, you should be doing these high difficulty things, right? You should be focusing on programming and infrastructure that takes care of the dog aggressive animals, the parvo positive, all of these things. This should be in your programming already because you have the resources and ability to absorb it. But we don't want to stop at shelters. We want to talk about who needs support in the communities. I know a lot of you are still coming onto this document, so you can
Heather,
go.
do you want, if you want to remind me really quick where we are, I'm happy to share my screen.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Yeah. So if you, thank you so much. Oh, this is perfect. Okay. So we just did number 3. So we'll go down and now, oh, sorry, we didn't do number 3. Go back up. Sorry, Bobby.
No worries.
Okay, so what shelters and organizations need support? So we talked about who in the shelter and then who in the community. So say you are in a no-kill community, you don't get to stop now. You have to talk to your neighbors, and then you have to talk to your neighbors' neighbors and your neighbors' neighbors. And we live in a global community, right? So you should be able to help people across the country at this point. So now we're talking about like what other organizations need support. There are so many places like Arkansas or other organizations that either don't have any funding for their animal control and animal services or have very, very low funding. So it's up to us who have funding, nonprofit organizations who have resources and power to be able to spread that. And so then again, there's solutions here. So you can go through and you should make sure, like if I'm a large established humane society, am I doing advocacy outside of my community? Am I assisting in the supply demand chain by allowing animals from high population areas to be transported in? Are you doing these things? If not, like ask why? So let's go down. And so this is, I think, really important and maybe something that we don't think about a lot because we're just trying to put out fires, but we need to ask who's being left out of the conversations when discussing solutions. So this is our DEI component, right? So a lot of times I feel like we are just like laying train tracks down through communities when we should be building bridges. I don't like metaphors, but so that's my metaphor for the day. We need to connect with those communities and we need to include people in our conversations. We did a survey early on and what we found is that there is not a lot of BIPOC leadership within rescue groups and nonprofit organizations. So it's time to change that like yesterday. So that's really important. And if you're a large established humane society, you can absolutely do these high difficulty things, but everyone should also be hiring and have their volunteer and foster groups be representative of their community. If that's not happening, go make that happen today. Okay, we can move on. Next we have in this document is a quiz. So this is like your quiz in Cosmo magazine. So get your glass of wine, light a candle. We're gonna find out your risk tolerance level. Very sexy, I know. But you know, this is just something we put together to see like, where do your answers line up to see where you're at. So if you're getting mostly A's here, you're probably in that group that just jumps right in. And if you're a co-founder like me, like you probably are used to that and so much respect to you, but it's time to pump the brakes and it's time to build your infrastructure and it's time to start raising money. Dr. Jefferson said something that like perked my ears up with like, you know, maybe there is more money, maybe there is enough money out there available to solve this problem. And again, I look at your 990s in my spare time. That's one of my hobbies. There's enough money. I promise you, there's so much money out there in animal welfare. So get your share. It's out there. And I'm going to ask Cole to talk about what you can do even if you don't have a lot of money in your community. So Cole, I'll get to you in a second because I think that's really important. But if you're getting mostly B's, then you're in that sweet spot and that's really awesome. It's just a matter of like pushing yourself and making sure you're doing that day after day, because what happens is when you get really good at building that foundation and you get more towards that established humane society thing, is we become complacent and we worry about maintaining the status quo. And sometimes the status quo is really good. Like for us, we focus on vulnerable animals. So our status quo is good, but it's not good enough because there's still animals dying in our shelter. So it's time to push ourselves. And it's time to move out of that and not put the burden on those small groups. So take this quiz when you have a moment. I think that it is, it's fun and it'll tell you where you're at. But I also think if you have a board of directors that is worried about doing things, or if you have someone in your group that is always worried about being sued, if you have a lawyer on your board, or if you have a lawyer, send this to them to be like, it's not all about making sure we don't get sued. Or send this to your finance people and be like, it's not all making sure we have a nice little like pile of money. It's also about making sure that we're serving our communities. So I think that is actually a nice segue to these two books that we want to refer you to. And this is not in the document. Actually, you know what, Bobby, why don't you click on that link, the Sustainable Life-Saving Program Assessment, because we can look at that really quickly too. Dr. Jefferson, do you want to explain this tool? Because you were the driving force behind it, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, so it's really overwhelming, and we recognize all of this is really overwhelming. And I should point out that when we're saying you should, it's only if you're looking to kind of link arms with all the shelters around you, all the organizations that exist in this universe, and try to figure out how do we responsibly spread out the work and also help each other rise to the place where we can all be effective in making sure that animals aren't dying. And yes, I recognize this is really focused on the animal end of this, but this document is meant to help try to puzzle through. So if you're on the far left-hand side and you can click through which animals are coming into your shelter or coming into your community, then you can go a little bit over to the right and see what kinds of programs are needed. And so some of these categories of animals, people have said, well, you know, they've always died in our community. They're going to continue dying because we don't have the programs to deal with them. And so we want to make it clear that there are programs out there. There are ways to be able to get to live outcomes for these animals without causing warehousing and without putting dangerous animals out on the streets. We recognize that there are limits. So trying to figure out, and so when you see this green box up here of zero unnecessary euthanasia, that does not mean zero euthanasia. That means zero unnecessary euthanasia. And then going further across, so looking at where you are. So if you say check mark, yep, all the desirable dogs and cats with minor needs in our community are saved. All the underage kittens and puppies that come into the public shelter are saved. Yep, critically ill and injured animals and feral cats are all saved. We have all those programs. We don't need to do any more. Then you can follow the line across and see where your community may need help in preventing those animals from coming into the shelter to begin with. And so you can start looking at, try to tie in the programming, the shelter programming to the community programming that's needed to help prevent those so that your organization can go further up, or you might be able to help another organization. And that's what the final column is on the right, is helping other organizations. And so we took a stab at, depending on where you are in this, where your organization is in this in terms of the community need, the animal need, and the community need, then what can you lend to a neighbor to help them get a little bit further up the chain as well? And so that's what this is. That's how you're supposed to read this. We recognize it's a lot of information and maybe hard to read.
I think it's awesome. I've already referenced it a few times, so it is a lot, but I think it's so great and so helpful. Okay, so moving on.
We have about 15 minutes left. So I think, can we pause a second with all of that? Because it is a lot of information, and just take a moment to look at questions in the chat or get feedback on that so far.
Absolutely. There's one question about questioning the word humane society versus humane organization. Any large nonprofit shelter that is in your community is what I mean. I just default to society, so it definitely wasn't singling them out. Cole answered a good question for municipal shelters that can't fundraise. You can use a Friends of nonprofit. But also I think we'll have Cole talk in a few minutes to talk about how you can still do these progressive programmings even if you don't have a ton of money flowing in. So I think that that's a really important piece. Are there any other questions? Anyone that wants to jump in?
So as we were going through this, it was feeling a little bit, sorry, Steve, I just was gonna say, I want to give you guys the platform to say, this doesn't feel good. Like this feels like a lot of pressure. This feels like you're shaking your finger at me. Let's talk about it. Don't feel shy. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no problem. So I'm the director of Liberty County Animal Services. We cover about 620 square miles of rural Georgia. Takes us about 45 minutes to get from our location to across to the coast for a call. We have 3 animal control officers, which covers the whole county, which has 6 cities, which we all cover. We get amazing donations from our partners, like, from Animal Aid, which pulls most of our animals, Animal Aid USA, amazing partner, to Atlanta Humane and Best Friends. So the food and all that stuff's not the issue. We have a food bank. It does really well. We donate to the public, bowls and everything. It's the medical costs, which is killing me. So because we do take in sick, injured, vicious, and that's what we have to take in. So my medical bills are skyrocket. We have 2 private practice vets in the area, which we're forced to use one of those 2. We don't have a vet on staff, so I'm forced to take the animals to a private practice. We contracted with them and they give us a lower cost, but it's still, we're averaging probably about a good close to $2,000 a week on bills, which is not sustainable for a small municipality. I've reached out to the lawyers, our county attorneys, in the essence of donations and all that, and it's the same thing. We have to find a third party, a nonprofit to be able to advocate for us and raise money. I've also been asking the public to, if they want to support us, help pay for the bill, just contact the vet directly and help bring our bill down. But is there anything else that I could be doing? We don't have a nonprofit. We have one nonprofit in our community and they are barely hanging on themselves. Is there anything else?
So where are you from? Sorry, Steve.
It's Hinesville, Georgia.
Okay, so hopefully there's this call is really to urge nonprofits, and that it breaks my heart to hear the municipalities that don't have the funding and ability to do these things. So if you're anywhere near Steve, call Steve and help him. Steve, we had the same problem too. We're a nonprofit, obviously, so we had a lot more wiggle room, but we figured it out, and the cost of building out our own clinic and hiring our own vet actually was cheaper than continuing to pay the private groups. And so it was really hard, but we got it together and we opened up our own vet clinic. So if there's any way you can figure that out and get your city council or whoever to help you with that, it's going to end up being cheaper in the long run. I'm sure that's going to take a lot of advocacy and that won't be easy. And I think Dr. Jefferson made a good point. I'm telling you all what you should do, but I also know that this is not easy, and I'm in the same space as you, and we struggle every day, and it's all really hard. So I'm not trying to rain on any of you or tell any of you that you're not working hard, because I know you are. I just think that there's a space for established organizations to be able to make solutions out there for groups like Steve's and for groups like Cole's that are really struggling. Maybe this is a perfect time for Cole to chime in and talk about how he's been creating these programs and pushing things on a very small budget.
Yeah, before he does that, I just want to stop for a second so I can make sure that we all understand what the core argument is here. I think the core argument is that organizations, and Dr. Jefferson, tell me if this is right, organizations that are well-funded and have a reasonable amount of funding could be helping harder groups of animals, could be helping more big dogs. We all know trying to transport out medium and large dogs, even those with no temperament issues, is hugely problematic. So I think you're arguing that we can be doing that, and that smaller groups actually need to be focusing on building capacity and not getting overwhelmed with so that they can't continue to operate. Is that the argument underneath all of this?
Yes, I think so. And I think that there's, Heather said it, I think Heather said it, that there is a tendency, and, my organization grew from all volunteer, 13 years ago to now we're a 10 million plus organization. And we've gone through the same trajectory of taking on tons of risk. And now it's difficult to get staff buy-in for risk and more risk and taking on another community's animals. And it's hard. And so this is not pointed at anyone in particular. It's for all of us to think about, and how do we shape our cultures to be more inclusive of our neighbors and of our of any suffering that's happening in our state, because that's our goal, right? Our goal is to end suffering, and it doesn't end as soon as you cross the city line or the county line. And so our hope is that we can, by focusing on this, wouldn't it be amazing if we could figure out how to really understand the need that's out there, and then spread it out. And I think that's why we want more brains on this, is how do we spread out Cole's need, and how do we spread out Steve's need, and spread it across the resources that are probably within Drive's reach. We know this is a hot topic, and we know transport's a hot topic. And so we're not necessarily trying to advocate for only one thing, but there are a lot of different solutions out there that maybe we can be pushing for. And one of them could be that we need to band together and demand that governments do better.
Yeah, Alexis, can you say what you just said in the chat? Do you mind saying that out loud? I think it's a really important point.
Sure. I just said that many local governments lack of investment, sense of responsibility to fund, or to have a value perspective on animal services is a huge problem in a lot of places. And some refuse to even list a budget line item at all for animal control, or do so well under what's needed in our experience. And shelters and rescues in these communities, I think I would love to switch the table a little bit and kind of define us as essentially subsidizing public safety and animal services in a role that the local government, or at least state government, should decide that they're going to step up to do. But it's incredibly hard to incentivize change when we're all here providing safety nets. None of us want to take a step back and obviously do anything like that, but there needs to be a change. And it's not even just the rural areas, it's everywhere, in places you wouldn't expect it to be either.
Ultimately, does the work of the NPO group come down to sort of figuring out that line between government and nonprofit, and then like where that responsibility should be held?
I certainly think so.
I think in a sense, but I think also, like, I don't want to ignore the fact that there is just a tremendous amount of power in the NPO field right now. And whether that is where it should be, or it should be with governments, I don't know the answer to that. And, we probably would all disagree on that. But I think that, what this is about is that we have so much power. And the two book recommendations that were up a little higher, Allison, if you can put them in again, I think that these speak to this point. One of them is Mutual Aid by Dean Spade. It's a really quick read. I highly recommend it. And the other one is Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. And I think that there's probably a tendency for a lot of us to be like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, but they both very much apply to us in our industry. Mutual aid, I think, will reinforce the point that Dr. Jefferson made, that if we put a huge burden on the small organizations, then we're going to push them out. And we all know rescue groups that have burned out because they're asked to take on so much of this, usually unpaid, and then they just spiral away. So if we want to preserve the ecosystem and make sure that groups are working together to save all of these lives, then we have to support each other and we have to meet in the middle. But there's this other topic that I think is so important, and it's that of justice and power, because money and resources are power. So if you come in and I say, hi, I am the Humane Society of Owen County, Illinois, and the community says, oh, we love animals, here's my money. And I say, give me your money so I can use it. Then I have a responsibility to serve the most vulnerable populations. And I'm probably going to lose a bunch of people in a second here, but I think decolonizing wealth has a really important moment in it. And again, he's talking about foundations. So there's probably this idea of like, oh, this doesn't apply to me. It does. It applies to everyone on this call. Foundations, corporations, large donors, major donors, or sometimes just wealthy people that are kicking you $1,000 or something like that. This is generational wealth often, not all the time. Please don't send me hate mail, not all the time, but this is generational wealth with which very often is coming from a white supremacist society, literally built on the backs of enslaved people and then carried on for generations. And now it's in our pockets. So if you receive money from foundations, if you receive money from corporations that have been around for a while getting money this way, then you are complicit in that system. And I'm not calling you racist. I'm not calling your organization racist. I'm just saying when we participate in capitalism, we participate in that system. But the really good part and the really fun part about that is now the power is shifted to us. So we have an ability now to use that money and to use that generational wealth to redistribute it in a way that targets historically oppressed communities and the most vulnerable animals. So, if we're using it just to catch that low hanging fruit, and I don't think anyone is ever doing that on purpose, I truly don't. But if we do, we're missing the point and we're missing the opportunity that comes with that power. So I think that is one of the most compelling pieces from those books and one of the most compelling pieces to start spending your money in a way that is the most efficient in saving animals and is the most targeted towards the most vulnerable. And that necessitates taking more risk. So that's my thesis here.
Yeah, and Heather, I think that's a very, very important statement to make. And one thing to remember is even when we're talking about slightly divisive issues or emotionally loaded issues, things that like this, at the end of the day, we're all on the same side. And there was a little bit in the chat, talking about Nora mentioned, organizations that are in the same community who seem to compete with each other. And that's when we talk about limited resource communities like mine. And the first thing you have to do is set the ego aside and start healing those wounds. I mean, half the organizations in this room were probably founded when somebody got mad at somebody. I mean, that's where a lot of our organizations come from. And then we spend a lot of time, stepping on each other's toes or duplicating efforts. And where we do have limited resources, we got to stop that. We have to go back to even those people that maybe we have a long history with and just say, hey, we're heading for the same thing. And same thing with the large ones. And I don't think that.
Hey, Cole, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there are so many people that are wanting to speak and we're running out of time.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I want to make sure we're making space for those folks. And I will say to all of you, we can continue this. We sort of knew it was going to lead to some interesting discussion. We didn't envision this being a one-time thing. So the two people that I want to make sure get a chance to speak are Emily Wood and let's see, Jennifer. Federico, please, if you can keep your comments brief since we are at the end of time, but we want to make sure to make space for your comments.
Hey, this is Jen Federico. I just wanted to say, because we are a municipal shelter and I was really shocked to see some of the comments about municipals and being underfunded, and we are well funded, but we have we need our MPOs to want Rocky Road and not just vanilla, which is what we find. And we're left with the Rocky Road, which is really hard when we are taking in all of animal control and not selectively intaking like the MPOs in our area do. So that's where I think we need to have more discussion on that.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Emily?
My comment's very, very similar. Is we recently had a statewide get together here in Florida, and I just noticed that there were a lot of people not in the room. A lot of non-government organizations not in the room because their business model is very, very different. They're importing small fluffy dogs and working on a supply and demand business model. And I just don't know how many of those folks are here today and how we make space where it doesn't feel like an accusatory conversation, but I can actually ask for the help that my large municipal shelter needs.
Dr. Jefferson, we have just a couple of minutes. Do you have any responses to those
Yeah, I would just say an hour is so short. It went by really quickly, and we just really didn't get a chance to dig in to have these robust discussions. That's what it's all about. That's what this group is all about. This leadership group is that we have the brain power to solve for some of these problems and these and we need a lot of help to get there. And I do hope we can talk about this again, because the last thing I want is anybody to leave this conversation feeling bad, because that's not the intent of this. The intent of it is to bring it up and bluntly talk about it so that we can actually get to solutions at the end.
Okay, so we are going to continue this. If you all, I think we have some space next week. I think we should spend the first half hour of this call next week talking about this. So if you do have people that you want to be in the conversation, please let us know. And I want to say that as the moderator, we try to pack the agendas, but we often do that in a way that means that discussion can get pushed off. So if you feel like you wanted to say something it didn't get to, we'll do a brief recap next week and then give you time to respond so that we can discuss. We do put a lot of pressure on our speakers to pack in a lot of information. So to Heather and Dr. Jefferson and Cole, thank you so much. And we want to continue to hear from you too. But this is just a beginning, I think, of a longer conversation for this group. So thanks everyone. And we hope you have a great weekend, and we will see you back here next week.